Hi there, I'm Brant at Crocker Farm Auction, and I'm here with this giant Stoneware water cooler made in Cortland County, New York. And this is going to be sold as part of our upcoming March 23rd, 2019 auction of American stoneware and redware pottery. This cooler gives us a lot of information about itself, which is awesome because so many times American stoneware is very cryptic. Some cases, many cases, things aren't signed at all and we have to attribute it. In the worst case scenario, we can't attribute it. Other times, a potter gives us some information, but it's kind of a tease, like we get some initials on the bottom or something, and it can be frustrating. Well, in this case, we have this great big double-handled cooler, and it has some important information stamped into it. So we have, first of all, a name here, Dr. Lewis Riggs, a town named Homer, and a date, 1836. So right off the bat, we know that this was made in Homer, New York, and we know it was made in 1836, which is great. And then we have the name Dr. Lewis Riggs, and you know, that's not a stoneware manufacturer, so we have to do some research to figure out who that guy is, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. It also has some initials stamped up here, MW. Now I'm going to flip this around real quick, and I'm going to show you some more markings that help us. We have Chollar and Darby, Homer 1836, and MW yet again. So we know it was made at the pottery of Chollar and Darby, which that maker's mark comes in actually, if you read Bill Ketchum's book, which is the authority on New York State stoneware, he postulates that this mark, I mean, based on primary sources and then also the date on this cooler, that 1836 is the first year for Chollar and Darby in Homer. And interestingly, just sort of as a side note, there's a tight relationship between Homer and Cortland, which is a neighboring town essentially in Cortland County. And so Chollar and Darby also concurrently, not exactly concurrently, but overlapping, had a pottery going on in Cortland. But that's important too, because that gives us some insight into who this MW was. First of all, Dr. Lewis Riggs was a prominent physician in Homer, New York. He lived there for a really long time and was well known to everyone in that town. And from researching him, it seems pretty apparent that this was made at Chollar and Darby's pottery for Dr. Lewis Riggs, probably to sit in his office, in his doctor's office, where it would have been a very familiar presence to all the citizens that were going in and out of that building. So Luke has talked about in a couple of the other videos we're posting that you know, beverage coolers are kind of the most public form of American stoneware, and because of that, they're often the most elaborate, because instead of just made to sit on a shelf in a home, in a cellar, in an outbuilding somewhere, whatever, they're actually meant to sit in a very public place where people can pour either water or hard liquor, some other beverage out of them. And so you can see that this is elaborately decorated with this beautiful floral design. This stoneware is kind of part of like a second generation of New York stoneware. Like the first generation is very Germanic in style and then morphs into the stuff they were making in Manhattan, say around the turn of the 19th century, the C. Crolius, Thomas Comerall, John Remy type stuff. And then as time moves on and you start to get into the 20s and 30s, upstate New York really has moved on to this style. So this is like a great example from that time period. But just to flesh out Lewis Riggs' life briefly, he was born in 1789 in Connecticut and was apprenticed to become a carpenter. And the carpenter with whom he was apprenticed moved to Cortland in 1805 And in 1809, he decided that he wanted to become a doctor. And as part of his training, he actually spent some time studying at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, where he trained with some of the biggest medical names of the day in America, including Benjamin Rush, one of the founding fathers. And so he had a great education, but he came back to the area and he settled in Homer in 1818. There was a brief period when he left, but he lived there kind of from 1818 all the way until his death in 1870. And so he was a really prominent citizen there. And just as a mark of his prominence, he actually ran for the House of Representatives and served, and was successful, and served in the Congress from 1841 to 42. Off the just, if you read his biography, which was actually published in like a Cortland County book later in the 19th century, it just sort of paints a picture of someone that everyone knew, who treated tons of people in and around Homer. But anyway, what's great is, so we know where this was made, we know at whose manufactory it was made, we know for whom it was made, we basically know where it was used, and we actually know the specific potter who made it. So that MW I pointed out earlier is Madison Woodruff, who is a pretty well-known potter. He'll eventually have his own shop in Cortland, and so you'll see pieces stamped M. Woodruff, Cortland. But he was only 26 roughly when this was made. He was born about 1810. So like I said, we also know then who made it, and it was actually a really well-known upstate New York potter of the time period. So anyway, this is just a really great example that gives us a lot of information that we don't usually get about a piece of stoneware. And it also has the wonderful provenance of being pictured in Bill Ketchum's book that I mentioned earlier. So it's just really got all the bells and whistles for New York State stoneware from this time period. And we're really excited to offer it in our upcoming March 23rd, 2019 auction of American stoneware.